The day my family discovered I was a stripper started like any other Tuesday. I was counting my tips from the night before when my mother's number flashed across my phone screen. That call changed everything. My name is Violet, and I never planned on taking my clothes off for money. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was 22, struggling through my final year of college and drowning in student debt when my roommate Gianna suggested dancing at the Pearl. "Mum, I can explain," I said, my voice trembling as I gripped the phone. "Explain? Explain?" Her voice cracked with rage. "Mrs. Peterson saw you at that disgusting establishment. Do you know what this will do to our family's reputation?" I closed my eyes, feeling my world crumble. Mrs. Peterson, our neighbour whose daughter I used to babysit. Of course she'd run straight to my mother. "I needed the money for school," I said quietly. "The writing programme. The writing programme! That useless degree you insisted on pursuing instead of law school?" She was practically screaming now. "Get home now! Your father needs to hear this directly from you." 2 hours later, I stood in our pristine living room, facing my parents and my brother Andre. Mom sat rigid on her favourite armchair, while Dad paced by the fireplace. Andre leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. "How long?" Dad's voice was ice cold. "8 months." Mom let out a strangled sob. "8 months of prostituting yourself?" "I'm not a prostitute," I shot back, anger finally breaking through my fear. "I dance. I pay my bills. I maintain a 4.0 GPA. I haven't asked you for a single penny since you cut off my tuition. Because we refused to fund that ridiculous writing degree." Mom sprang to her feet. "We had your life planned out perfectly. Law school, then joining your father's firm. But no, you had to chase some childish dream of becoming an author." Andre finally spoke up. "Mom, maybe we should stay out of this." Both our parents snapped simultaneously. I looked at my brother, seeing the conflict in his eyes. He'd always been the good child, following the path our parents laid out. Now he was a junior partner at Dad's firm, living the life they'd wanted for me. "I'm not ashamed," I said firmly, though my hands were shaking. "I work hard, I'm safe, and I'm paying my own way through school." Dad stopped pacing. "No daughter of mine will be a stripper." The finality in his voice made my blood run cold. "Then I guess I'm not your daughter anymore," I whispered. Mom gasped. "You don't mean that." "No, Mom, you don't mean that. You're the ones making this choice." I turned to face them all. I'm adult enough to make my own decisions, and I'm adult enough to live with the consequences. "Violet," Andre stepped forward, but Dad held up his hand. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." Dad's words fell like hammer blows. "We will not have this shame in our family." I looked at each of them. Mom's tears, Dad's stone face, Andre's helpless expression. Years of conditional love and impossible expectations crystallized in that moment. "Goodbye then," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. "I hope your reputation was worth it." I walked out of that house with nothing but my car keys and the clothes on my back. Gianna was waiting in her beat-up Honda around the corner. I'd texted her on the way over, knowing I might need an escape plan. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. "Your room at my place is ready. We'll get through this." That night, curled up on Gianna's spare mattress, I made myself a promise. I would prove them all wrong. I would turn their shame into my success. I would make my childish dream of becoming an author reality. "You okay?" Gianna asked from the doorway. I wiped my eyes and sat up. "No, but I will be. I'm working double shifts at the Pearl this week. I need to make up for the textbooks I left behind." "And you're writing?" "I'm not giving up on that either." I managed a small smile. "Maybe this will give me something real to write about." Gianna nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Good, because the world needs to hear your voice, not their expectations." As I lay back down, I thought about the manuscript hidden on my laptop. A story about a girl breaking free from golden handcuffs. It had felt like fiction when I started it. Now it was my reality. Tomorrow I would dance. I would write. I would survive. And someday, I would thrive. Not despite their rejection, but because of it. They thought they were writing the end of my story. They didn't realize they were only writing the beginning. And that's when the stripper pole broke. I finished my story, and the audience erupted in laughter. The bookstore was packed, standing room only, with readers clutching copies of my latest bestseller, Dancing Through Darkness. 6 years had passed since that Tuesday when my family cast me out. Now, at 28, I was living a life they couldn't have imagined for me, or maybe just couldn't have accepted. Ms. Violet, a young woman raised her hand during the Q&A. How much of your success do you attribute to your past experiences? I smiled, remembering the nights at the Pearl that had funded not just my degree, but my first laptop, my first apartment, and the countless writing workshops that shaped my craft. All of it, I answered honestly. Every story needs truth at its core. Mine just happens to have a few sequins and 6-inch heels mixed in. After the signing, Caden, my publisher, pulled me aside. Your numbers are through the roof. The authenticity resonates with readers. They can tell you've lived these stories. Speaking of stories, Gianna interrupted, waving her phone, you need to see this. She handed me her phone, open to a local news article. The headline made my heart stop. Murray and Associates law firm faces bankruptcy amid investment scandal. Your father's firm, Gianna said softly. Apparently they made some bad investments. Really bad. I skimmed the article, my throat tightening. The firm where my father had worked for 30 years, where Andre was now a partner, was crumbling. The family's assets were being liquidated to cover the losses. There's more. Gianna swiped to another article. Your childhood home is going on the market. The elegant Victorian house that had been my prison and paradise appeared on the screen. The same house I'd been banished from all those years ago. Violet? Caden's voice snapped me back to reality. Your car's here. We need to head to the TV interview. Right. I handed the phone back to Gianna. Thanks for showing me. In the car, Caden reviewed my talking points for the interview, but my mind kept drifting to that house. To the window seat where I'd written my first stories. To the garden where Mom had taught me about roses before appearances became more important than affection. Earth to Violet. Caden waved his hand in front of my face. You okay? The house I grew up in is for sale, I blurted out. My family's broke. Caden's eyebrows shot up. The same family that kicked me out? Yeah. I laughed, but it sounded hollow. Karma's a funny thing, isn't it? What are you thinking? I'm thinking. I paused, an idea taking shape. I'm thinking I should buy it. The house? Caden stared at me. Are you sure that's wise? My phone buzzed. A text from Andre, the first in years. I guess you heard. Mom and Dad don't know what to do. They're too proud to ask for help. Of course they are, I muttered. Violet? Caden's voice was gentle. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. You're already doing that. I turned to him. But what if this isn't about revenge? What if it's about closing a circle? Then make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. He checked his watch. We're here, ready to dazzle them. The interview went smoothly. I'd gotten good at telling my story without revealing too much. Afterward, in my apartment, I called Gianna. I need a favor, I said as soon as she answered. Can you find out who's handling the house sale? Already did, she replied. It's Mark Joseph from Premier Realty. Want his number? I grabbed a pen. You know me too well. Vi, her voice turned serious. Are you sure about this? Last time you were in that house? Last time I was in that house, I was powerless, I cut in. This time would be different. Because you'd own it. Because I've owned my story since then. I looked at the wall of my office where my first dollar from the Pearl hung next to my first published article. They wanted to write my ending. Maybe it's time I showed them who really holds the pen. Just be careful, Gianna sighed. I remember picking up the pieces last time. I'm not that broken girl anymore, I said softly. I'm not looking for their approval. I'm looking for closure. Something like that. I wrote down Mark's number. Besides, wouldn't it be poetic? The stripper daughter buying the family estate? Gianna laughed. When you put it that way, it does have a certain dramatic flair. Very on brand for a best-selling author. After we hung up, I stood at my window, looking out at the city lights. The same lights that had seemed so threatening when I first started dancing now felt like old friends. I'd made my peace with my past. Maybe it was time to make peace with my future. I picked up my phone and dialed Mark's number. It was time to go home, on my terms this time. The asking price is $8.50, Mark said, leading me through the familiar front door. But given the market and their urgency to sell, we might negotiate that down. Walking into my childhood home felt like stepping into a time capsule. The same crystal chandelier hung in the foyer, though its sparkle had dimmed. Mum's precious Persian rug still covered the hardwood floors, but they were worn thin in places. The current owners have lived here for 30 years, Mark continued, not knowing he was talking about my parents. They've maintained it well, but some updates would be needed. I ran my hand along the banister, remembering how I used to slide down it when no one was watching. Tell me about these owners. Mark shuffled through his papers. Lovely couple, really. Bit proud, though. The husband's law firm hit some trouble and they're downsizing. Shame, really. They raise their children here. Children? I kept my voice neutral. 2, I believe. A son who's still in the area and a daughter who... He checked his notes. Who moved away some years ago. I bit back a bitter laugh. Moved away. That was one way to put it. The library, I said, moving down the hallway without waiting for his direction. I'd like to see it. Mark hurried after me. Oh, you know the layout? I've seen the listing photos. The library doors were closed. I hesitated for a moment before pushing them open. The smell of old books and leather hit me immediately. Dad's collection still lined the walls, each leather-bound volume perfectly aligned. This was where he'd announced my law school acceptance, an acceptance I never used. Beautiful space, Mark commented. Perfect for a home office. Or for writing, I murmured. The owners are hoping for a quick sale, Mark said, checking his phone. They need to be out within 60 days. I walked to the window seat, my old reading nook. The cushions were faded, but I could still see the small ink stain where I'd spilled my pen, writing my first short story. I'll take it, I said suddenly. Mark blinked. Don't you want to see the rest of the house? No need. I turned to face him. I'll pay asking price, all cash. But I have conditions. He pulled out a notepad, looking both surprised and pleased. Of course. First, my identity stays completely confidential until closing. Use my corporation name, Rising Phoenix Publishing, for all paperwork. He nodded, scribbling. Second, I want to close as quickly as possible, 30 days max. That shouldn't be a problem with a cash offer. And third, I took a deep breath, I want to be present when you tell them about the offer, in person. Mark frowned. That's unusual. Typically, the buyers and sellers don't meet until closing, if at all. It's non-negotiable. I met his eyes. Those are my terms. I'll need to check with the sellers, but given the offer terms, I don't foresee any objections. Back in my car, I called Gianna. Well? She answered on the first ring. I did it. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I'm buying the house. Holy shit. She paused. How did it feel being back there? Like walking through a museum of my past mistakes. And theirs. I started the engine. Mark's setting up a meeting to present the offer. In person. Vi. Gianna's voice held a warning. Are you sure you want to do it this way? They need to see me. Need to know that the daughter they threw away isn't just surviving. She's thriving enough to buy their house out from under them. That sounds a lot like revenge. Maybe it is. I pulled out of the driveway, looking at the house in my rearview mirror. But maybe they need to face what they did. Really face it. And what about Andre? Have you told him? I sighed. Not yet, but he'll find out soon enough. That evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at the formal offer papers Mark had emailed. My cursor hovered over the signature line. One click, and I'd set in motion something that couldn't be undone. My phone buzzed. Another text from Andre. Mom's not eating, Dad's not sleeping. I don't know how to help them. I typed back. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places. Then I signed the offer and hit send. Minutes later, Mark called. They want to meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. The sellers are eager to discuss the offer. I smiled, imagining my parents' relief at finding a quick buyer. They had no idea that their salvation would come from the very person they'd condemned. Perfect, I said. I'll be there. After hanging up, I walked to my closet and pulled out a garment bag. Inside was a designer suit I'd bought for my last book tour. Elegant, expensive, powerful. Not a sequin in sight. Tomorrow I would walk back into that house not as the shameful daughter they'd cast out, but as the successful woman I'd become. And this time, I'd be the one holding all the cards. I just hoped I was ready for what would happen when those cards hit the table. You're pacing, Gianna said, watching me from my couch. It was 1 p.m., an hour before the meeting. You're going to wear a hole in that expensive floor. I can't help it. I stopped in front of my full-length mirror, adjusting my blazer for the 100th time. What if I'm making a huge mistake? Then it's your mistake to make. She stood up and straightened my collar. But you look like $1 million. Or more accurately, $850,000. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Sellers confirmed. Meeting in their library. The library? I muttered. Of course it would be the library. Poetic, isn't it? Gianna smiled. Where your dad crushed your dreams of being a writer, you'll now sign the papers that make his house yours. When you put it that way, it sounds terrible. No, she squeezed my shoulder. It sounds like karma. The drive to my childhood home felt surreal. I parked a block away, not wanting my parents to see my car. Mark was waiting at the corner. Ready? He asked, briefcase in hand. One thing first, I said. When we go in, let me do the revealing. Please. He nodded, though confusion crossed his face. Your money. Your show. We walked up the familiar path to the front door. Each step felt heavier than the last. Mark rang the doorbell, and my heart nearly stopped when my mother opened the door. She looked older, tired. Her perfectly coiffed hair now showed streaks of grey. She didn't recognize me at first. I was hidden behind Mark, and 6 years had changed me considerably. Please, come in, she said, her voice carrying that same artificial politeness I remembered. Lawrence is waiting in the library. I kept my head down as we followed her, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors. The sound echoed through the house like a countdown. Dad sat in his leather armchair, looking smaller than I remembered. Andre stood by the window, my old reading spot. His eyes widened when he saw me, but he quickly schooled his expression. Thank you for meeting on such short notice, Mark began, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. As discussed, I have a buyer who's prepared to meet your asking price, all cash, with a 30-day closing. Mom sat straighter. That's wonderful news. The buyer has requested to be present for this meeting, Mark continued, glancing at me. I stepped forward, finally lifting my head. Hello, Mom. Dad? The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's hand flew to her throat. Dad's face drained of colour. Andre looked like he might be sick. Violet? Mom whispered. Surprise, I said softly, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm your buyer. Dad stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. This is some kind of joke. No joke. I nodded to Mark, who began laying out the paperwork. Rising Phoenix Publishing, my company, is prepared to buy this house. Full asking price, no conditions except the quick closing. You? Mum's voice cracked. You have that kind of money? Turns out writing wasn't such a useless dream after all. I met her eyes. My 4th book just hit the bestseller list. The advance for the 5th could buy this house twice over. Andre cleared his throat. You knew about this? He asked Mark. Mark looked uncomfortable. I only learned the buyer's identity yesterday. The offer is legitimate, I can assure you. We won't sell to her, Dad declared. You can't afford not to, I countered. Your firm is bankrupt. Your assets are frozen. This house goes to auction in 60 days if you don't sell. Do you really want the neighborhood watching that spectacle? Mom flinched at the word spectacle. Always worried about appearances even now. Why are you doing this? She asked. Because I can. I walked to the window seat, running my hand along the faded cushion. Because the daughter you threw away for being a stripper is now successful enough to buy your house. Ironic, isn't it? If this is about revenge, Dad started, it's about coming full circle. I cut him off. You made your choice 6 years ago. Now, I'm making mine. Andre stepped forward. Vi, please. The papers are ready, Mark interrupted, clearly wanting to move things along. Shall we proceed? Mom looked at Dad, tears in her eyes. He stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. Finally, he nodded. We'll sign, he said quietly. As Mark guided them through the paperwork, I stood by the bookshelf, examining the leather-bound law books my father had once hoped I'd study. Behind me, I heard the scratch of pens on paper, my mother's muffled sniffles, the rustle of pages being turned. It's done, Mark announced finally. We'll schedule the closing for 30 days from today. I turned back to my family, my broken, proud family. I'll have my lawyers contact you about the transition details. As I walked out of the library, Andre caught up with me in the hallway. Was it worth it? He asked softly. I looked back at our parents, still sitting shell-shocked among the signed papers. Ask me in 30 days. The front door closed behind me with a familiar click. But this time, I was the one choosing to walk away. 30 days passed in a blur of legal paperwork and silent tension. Now I stood in the closing attorney's office, watching my parents shuffle in, looking like they'd aged another decade since our last meeting. The funds have been verified, the attorney announced, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. We just need final signatures from all parties. Mom wouldn't look at me. Dad stared straight ahead, his jaw set in that familiar stubborn line. Andre had chosen not to attend. He'd texted me earlier. I can't watch this. Before we sign, I said, making everyone pause, I have something to say. Mom finally lifted her eyes to meet mine. The defeat in them almost made me falter. Almost. 6 years ago, you gave me an ultimatum in this city. Strip or stay. Dance or daughter. Not both. I pulled a folder from my briefcase. I'd like to show you what that choice led to. I laid out magazine covers featuring my books, newspaper articles about my success, photos of my speaking engagements at universities. While you were busy being ashamed of me, I was busy building something. Violet, Dad's voice carried a warning tone I remembered from childhood. This isn't necessary. Oh, but it is. I pulled out one final piece of paper, my first paycheck stub from the Pearl. This paid for my textbooks after you cut me off, $342. I framed the original. Mom made a small choking sound. Every dollar I earned on that stage went toward my future. Every judgment, every whisper, every condemning look, I turned them all into fuel. I met their eyes in turn. And now here we are. Poetic, isn't it? The attorney cleared his throat uncomfortably. Shall we proceed with the signatures? In a moment, I said, pulling out one more document. This is my offer to let you stay in the house. Dad's head snapped up. Mom gasped. What? She whispered. A rental agreement, market rate, month-to-month lease. I slid it across the desk. Your choice. Dad's hands trembled as he picked up the paper. Why would you? Because I'm not you, I said simply. I don't believe in destroying people to prove a point. Mom started crying quietly. Dad put down the rental agreement and finally, really looked at me. We were wrong, he said, his voice rough. About everything. Yes, you were. I kept my voice steady. But this isn't about revenge. It's about showing you who I really am, who I've always been if you'd bothered to look. The stripper who became a best-selling author, Mom said softly, surprising me. I've read your books. All of them. I hadn't expected that. You have? She nodded, wiping her eyes. The character in your second book, the mother who couldn't see past her own expectations, that was me, wasn't it? It was every parent who values appearance over authenticity. I swallowed hard. Every mother who confuses control with love. The attorney shuffled papers nervously. The rental agreement would need to be handled separately from the sale. Then let's finish the sale first, I said, picking up a pen. Mom? Dad? Your signatures will transfer ownership to me. The rental agreement is there if you want it. Your choice. For once, I'm giving you the ultimatum. Dad looked at Mom, then back at me. We don't deserve your mercy. No, I agreed. But maybe that's exactly why I'm offering it. The next few minutes passed in a blur of signatures and initials. With each stroke of the pen, years of pain and pride transferred hands, sealed in legal language and notary stamps. Congratulations, the attorney said when we finished. The property is now officially owned by Rising Phoenix Publishing. I stood, gathering my things. The rental agreement is good for 48 hours. Let me know your decision. As I turned to leave, Mom called out, Violet? I paused at the door. That night, when you left, her voice cracked. I wanted to run after you. Why didn't you? Pride. She looked down at her hands. Always pride. Pride is expensive, I said quietly. I learned that at the Pearl. Every night I danced, I left my pride in the dressing room, but I kept my dignity. There's a difference. Dad stood up. We'd like to sign the rental agreement, if the offer still stands. I nodded to the attorney. Draw up the papers. As I walked out of the office, my phone buzzed. A text from Andre. How did it go? I typed back. They're staying, as my tenants. His response came quickly. You're a better person than they deserved. No, I replied. I'm exactly the person they failed to see. I got into my car and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The scared girl who'd walked out of that house 6 years ago was gone. In her place sat a woman who'd learned that the best revenge isn't serving cold justice. It's serving grace when they expect wrath. The house was mine now, but more importantly, so was my story. A week after the closing, I sat across from my parents at their favorite restaurant. Now my treat. The silence between us felt heavy with unspoken words and years of distance. The firm's liquidation is final, Dad said, breaking the tension. 28 years of building it, gone in months. What happened? I asked, genuinely curious. He sighed, looking older than his years. Bad investments. Trust in the wrong people. Pride preventing me from seeing the warning signs until it was too late. Sounds familiar, I said quietly. Mom flinched. She hadn't touched her wine. We've been doing a lot of thinking, Violet, about everything. That makes 2 of us. I took a sip of my water. Andre tells me you've read my books. The scene in your 3rd book, Dad leaned forward, where the father throws away his daughter's dance shoes. That was about me, wasn't it? Everything I write is about us in some way. I met his gaze. Writers turn their pain into prose. It's how we survive. A waiter arrived with our food, providing a brief respite from the intensity of the conversation. Tell us, Mom said after he left, about those years. The real story. I put down my fork. Are you sure you want to hear it? They both nodded. After you kicked me out, I lived with Gianna, worked double shifts at the Pearl, took morning classes, wrote until dawn. I smiled slightly. The other dancers helped me study. Did you know that? They quizzed me on literature between sets. Mom's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. I graduated summa cum laude, got published in literary magazines. An agent found me. Then Caden, my publisher, took a chance on my first book. I paused. The advance was enough to quit dancing, but I kept my first pair of platform heels as a reminder. A reminder of what? Dad asked. That sometimes the path to dignity runs through places others consider shameful. The silence that followed felt different, less hostile, more contemplative. Your brother, Mom started, then stopped. What about him? He defended you. That night, after you left, said we were making a terrible mistake. She dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. He was right. Andre's always been smarter than people give him credit for. I smiled sadly. He used to sneak into my shows, you know. Not to watch, to make sure I was safe. Left before I ever saw him. Dad put down his fork hard. He knew where you were? All that time? He was being a better father than you were, I said sharply, then softer. He was protecting his little sister. Like we should have done, Mom whispered. A couple walked past our table and Mom instinctively straightened, putting on her social mask. Some habits die hard. You don't have to pretend anymore, I said. The neighbours all know about the bankruptcy, about selling the house, about everything. Old habits, she murmured. Speaking of the house, Dad cleared his throat, the rental agreement is just business, I finished for him. I'm your landlord, not your saviour. We know. He looked down at his plate. But it's more than we deserve. Maybe. I leaned back. Or maybe it's exactly what we all deserve, a chance to rewrite our story. How can you be so forgiving? Mom asked. I'm not. I met her eyes. I'm being strategic. Success isn't about destroying those who hurt you. It's about building something so magnificent that their rejection becomes irrelevant. The waiter returned with the check. I reached for it before Dad could try. Let me, he protested weakly. You can't afford it, I said, not unkindly. Besides, this is what successful authors do. They treat their parents to dinner. As we walked to our cars, Mom suddenly stopped. Would you sign my copies of your books? I brought them. They're in the car. I watched her retrieve a canvas bag full of hardcovers. All my books, their spines cracked from reading. You really did read them, I said, surprised. Over and over. She handed me a pen. They were the only way I could hear your voice. I opened the first book, thinking carefully before writing. To Mom. Sometimes the hardest stories to read are the ones we're part of. Love. Violet. She read it, tears spilling onto the page. Dad looked over her shoulder, his arm around her for the first time in years. The house, he said suddenly, will be out by the end of the month. What? I looked up from signing the last book. But the rental agreement is generous, Mom finished. But we need to find our own way now, like you did. I handed back the books, understanding. They needed to rebuild, just as I had. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. Okay, I said simply. But dinner, same time next week? They both nodded, and for the first time in 6 years, their smiles reached their eyes. Moving day arrived with a crisp autumn breeze. I stood in the driveway, watching my parents load the last of their belongings into a rented moving truck. They'd found a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, but it was a start. Need any help? I asked, approaching the truck. Dad wiped his forehead. I think we've got it. Though I never realized how much stuff we'd accumulated over 30 years. The furniture stays, right? I gestured toward the house. As we agreed? Yes. Mom emerged from the garage carrying a box labelled Photos. Though I'd like to show you something before we leave. She led me up to my old bedroom, now empty except for the built-in window seat. Kneeling down, she pressed a hidden latch and a small compartment popped open. I kept these, she said, pulling out a stack of papers. Every article you published, every review, even the ones under your pen name, before you started using your real name. I took the yellowed clippings with trembling hands. You followed my career. Even then. Of course I did. She touched my arm hesitantly. I was wrong, Violet. So terribly wrong, but I never stopped being your mother. A car door slammed outside and Andre's voice carried up. Mom? Dad? The truck's ready. We headed downstairs to find Andre and Dad securing the last few boxes. This is it then, Dad said, looking around the foyer one last time. His eyes lingered on the chandelier, now sparkling again after I'd had it cleaned. It's just a house, I said softly. No, Mom shook her head. It was our prison. We were so caught up in appearances, in what the neighbours would think, in maintaining this facade. We lost sight of what really mattered. Andre stepped forward. Speaking of what matters, I have news. We all turned to him. I'm leaving the law, he announced, opening a community arts centre downtown, using my savings and some investors I found. Dad's mouth fell open. But your career was your dream, Dad. Not mine. Andre smiled. Violet taught me that sometimes you have to disappoint your parents to become who you're meant to be. I couldn't help but laugh. An arts centre? Really? Really? He grinned. And I want you to be our first guest speaker. Show those kids that their dreams matter no matter what anyone says. Mum started crying again, but this time they were different tears. We really messed up with both of you, didn't we? You did your best, Andre said, hugging her, with what you knew then. But now we all know better. Dad cleared his throat. The truck's waiting. We should... Wait, I said suddenly. I have something for you. I ran to my car and returned with a manuscript. My new book. It's not published yet, but I want you to read it first. Mom took it carefully. What's it about? Forgiveness, I said, and how sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. Dad read the title aloud. Dancing with Ghosts, a story of family, forgiveness, and finding your way home. It's your story too, I said. All of ours. The moments stretched between us heavy with understanding. Then Andre's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. The rental office closes in an hour, he reminded them. We need to get your keys. One by one, they hugged me. Mom held on the longest. We'll see you for dinner next week? She asked. Same time, same place, I promised. I watched them drive away. Dad at the wheel of the moving truck, Mom in the passenger seat, Andre following in his car. When they turned the corner, I walked back into the house. My house. The emptiness felt different now, not hollow but full of possibility. I walked through each room, touching walls that held 3 decades of memories, both painful and precious. In the library, I found a note propped against Dad's prized law books. These belong to you now, not because I want you to be a lawyer, but because you've proven you can win any case life brings you. Love, Dad. In my old bedroom, another note tucked into the window seat. I saved your first story, the one about the girl who could fly. I should have known then that no cage could hold you. Love, Mom. And in the kitchen, one from Andre. Remember when you taught me to make pancakes at midnight? Let's do that again sometime. This time I'm buying the syrup. Love, your proud big brother. I sat on the stairs holding all 3 notes and felt the last pieces of anger melt away. The house that had once witnessed my shame now stood as testament to something else. The power of owning your story, all of it, the glitter and the grit, the darkness and the dawn. My phone buzzed. A text from Gianna. You okay? I looked around at my new home, at the space that would hold my next chapter, and typed back, better than okay. I'm free. The grand opening of Andre's Arts Centre buzzed with energy. Local news cameras rolled as I stepped up to the podium, facing a room full of young dreamers and their parents. When I was 16, I began. I wrote my first story in a window seat, hiding from parents who thought art was a waste of time. Today, I own that window seat, and that house, and my story. In the front row, Mom and Dad sat holding hands. They looked different now, softer, more real. Dad had traded his suits for casual wear, and Mom had finally let her hair go naturally grey. Society loves to tell us who we should be, I continued. Parents, teachers, neighbours, everyone has an opinion about your path. But here's the truth. The only path that matters is the one you carve for yourself. I pulled out my old platform heels from behind the podium. Gasps and whispers rippled through the audience. These paid for my degree. Every dance, every dollar, every judgment I endured, they all led me here. To this moment, to this truth, there is no shame in surviving. There is only pride in thriving. Andre stood at the back, beaming. His arts centre had transformed an abandoned warehouse into a haven of creativity. Dance studios, writing workshops, painting classes, a place where dreams didn't need permission to exist. My brother and I learned the hard way that disappointing your parents might be the price of becoming yourself. I smiled at Andre. But sometimes, if you're lucky, they learn to see you. Really see you. After the speech during the reception, a teenage girl approached me clutching my latest book. "My parents hate that I dance," she whispered. "They say it's inappropriate." I knelt down to her level. "What do you say?" "That when I dance, I feel like I'm flying." "Then fly," I said, signing her book. "The ground will always be there to catch you." Her mother appeared, looking uncomfortable. I stood to face her. "She has real talent," I said before she could speak, "and a stronger spirit than you know." The woman glanced at my book, then at her daughter. Perhaps we could talk about proper training." Andre materialized beside me. "We have an excellent dance program here. Scholarships available." As they walked away to discuss details, Mom touched my arm. "That was you," she said softly. "At her age, we just couldn't see it then." "But you see it now," I replied. "In her. In others." Dad joined us carrying coffee. The contractor called. "Your renovations are finished." I nodded. I'd transformed my childhood home into a writer's retreat, keeping one room as a permanent office for myself. The window seat remained untouched, a reminder of where stories begin. "Speaking of renovations," Andre called out, waving us over to a wall, "I have something to show you." He pulled down a cloth covering, revealing a mural. It showed a young girl writing at a window seat, while behind her a dancer twirled in shadows. Both figures had my face. "The duality of Violet," he said proudly. "Writer and dancer, daughter and rebel. Living proof that we contain multitudes." Mum started to cry, but Dad surprised us all by laughing. "All those years trying to make you two fit into neat little boxes." He shook his head. "Look what happened when we let you out." Gianna arrived, fashionably late as usual. "Sorry I missed the speech, but I brought champagne." We gathered in Andre's office, popping the cork and filling plastic cups. The sunset painted the room gold through the industrial windows. "A toast," Andre raised his cup, "to second chances." "To found family," Gianna added, squeezing my hand. "To forgiveness," Mom said quietly. "To truth," Dad offered. I lifted my cup last. "To owning your story, every chapter, every verse, every dance." As conversations flowed around me, I watched the teenage dancer from earlier practicing in one of the studios. Her mother sat watching, uncertainty warring with pride on her face. I touched the necklace I wore, a small silver key on a chain. It opened both the art center and my house, linking my past and future in tangible ways. Andre sidled up beside me. "Happy?" "Content," I corrected. "It's better than happy." "The mural?" He hesitated. "Was it too much?" "It's perfect." I hugged him. "Thank you for seeing both sides of me even when I couldn't." Through the window, I could see the city lights beginning to twinkle. Somewhere out there, a girl was probably dancing for dollars, funding her own dreams. Another was probably writing in secret, finding her voice. I touched the window glass, speaking softly to those unknown dreamers. "Keep going. Your story matters." Behind me, my family, both blood and chosen, continued celebrating. Their voices blended into a melody of reconciliation and hope, proving that sometimes the happiest endings aren't endings at all. They're just better beginnings.
The soft spring sunlight streamed into the hospital room. In the white room filled with the smell of disinfectant, I held my mother's hand as it grew colder. At 11 years old, I couldn't fully grasp the gravity of what was happening before me. But I could painfully sense one thing: the strength in my mother's hand was fading day by day. My name is Sally, and I'm 37 years old. This is a story of how the bonds within a family unraveled and how new strength was discovered. Before my mother fell ill, we were an ordinary family, blessed with simple but certain happiness. My father, Kevin, worked earnestly as an office worker at a mid-sized trading company, while my mother, Cheryl, was a homemaker who took care of the household. We didn't indulge in luxury, but every weekend we always went out as a family. It was our tradition to take our old car on drives to the nearby countryside. As my father drove, he would always play nostalgic pop songs. Whenever Billy Joel's "Just the Way You Are" came on, my mother would sing along joyfully, though often off-key. From the back seat, I secretly cherished the sight of my parents like that. Sometimes we'd stop by a diner where I would order my favorite omelet. My mother would say, "Let me have a taste of yours too, Sally," and take a bite from my plate. These small joys were part of our everyday life. The change began during the winter of my 4th grade. My mother suddenly tripped and fell on the stairs. She laughed it off as nothing serious, but after that she started to get sick more frequently. At first we thought it was just fatigue. But as her hospital visits increased and late-night whispered phone calls continued, things started to feel different. My father's expression grew darker with each passing day, and our weekend drives became less frequent. Even the sound of chopping from the kitchen lacked the usual energy. The taste of my mother's cooking also began to change little by little. One day when I came home from school, I saw my mother crying in the living room. Startled, my mother noticed me and quickly wiped away her tears. "I'm fine, Sally. I just got something in my eye." Even now, I can vividly remember the forced smile she gave me at that moment. She never told me anything, but I could painfully sense the change in the air. My parents' conversations at night became whispers, and sometimes I could hear broken sobs. The day my mother's hospitalization was decided, my father sat me on his lap and tried to explain in a trembling voice, "Sally, Mommy is." But his words were broken, and in the end, I didn't understand anything. Still, when I saw the tears welling up in his eyes, I realized something terrible was happening. After her hospital stay began, my mother weakened rapidly. The chemotherapy caused her once lustrous blonde hair to fall out, and her cheeks became sunken. Even so, whenever I visited, she tried her best to act cheerful. "Sally, are you having fun at school? Are you eating all of Daddy's dinners properly?" I tried to answer with a bright voice, but sometimes my voice trembled. And then, that Tuesday night came. In the sterile air of the white hospital room, the sound of the heart monitor was the only thing breaking the silence. "Mommy, wake up." No matter how many times I called out, my mother never answered. My father held me tightly, and I could feel his shoulders trembling. Around us, nurses moved frantically, but the scene blurred and faded in my vision. It felt like I was trapped in a bad dream, but this was reality. The funeral was held at a church near my mother's family home. One after another, people in black clothing came to pay their respects, and I repeated my thanks mechanically. In the flickering candlelight, my mother's portrait was the only thing smiling gently. After my mother's death, the shape of our family changed drastically. My father immersed himself in work, and his time at home dwindled significantly. I often ate dinner alone in an empty house after coming back from school. Sitting before frozen meals heated in the microwave, I would sometimes remember my mother's homemade dishes and start crying. Even when I occasionally saw my father, our conversations were kept to the bare minimum. Neither of us knew how to accept my mother's absence. One day, 6 months later, my father began by saying, "I have something important to talk about." I sensed a mix of hope and anxiety in his expression, and a suffocating feeling of foreboding tightened my chest. "Sally, I want to introduce someone special today." The woman who walked into the living room was completely different from my mother. She had long hair dyed brown, flashy makeup, and designer brand clothes. From the very beginning, her smile felt off to me. "Nice to meet you. I'm Millie," she said in a sickly sweet voice as she approached me. "Your father has told me a lot about you, Sally. From now on, we'll all become a new family together, okay?" At those words, something inside me froze. The way she seemed to so easily replace my mother made me feel an indescribable anger. But when I saw how happy my father looked, I decided to suppress those feelings. After that, everything progressed rapidly. Millie and my father began going on frequent dates, acting like a young couple, and within just 3 months they decided to get married. The day my father informed me of their decision, something inside me froze again. "I've decided to marry Millie," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. It had only been 6 months since my mother passed away. In that short period of time, my father was trying to turn a new page in his life. "I'm against it." The words burst out of my mouth in a harsher tone than I had expected. My father's expression darkened. "Why?" "Millie is a wonderful person. She truly cares about you too," he said. But I still didn't understand her as a person. It was too soon. I wasn't ready to welcome a new woman into a house that still carried my mother's warmth. "Have you forgotten about Mom?" When I threw those words at him, a deep sadness appeared on my father's face. "Of course not." "But we have to keep living," he said quietly. The weight of his words pierced my heart. That night, I cried in my room. In the photo frame, my mother was smiling gently, as always. If she were alive, what would she say? Thinking about that, I eventually fell asleep. "Sally, your father has the right to be happy too, doesn't he?" One day, Millie said those words to me. Behind them, I felt an unspoken pressure saying, "Don't get in the way." That night, I faced my father and took a deep breath. "I'll try to accept Millie," I said. It took more courage than I had imagined to say those words. But seeing my father's happy face, I was convinced it was the right decision. It wasn't an easy choice, that's for sure. However, there are times when you have to suppress your own feelings and choose the happiness of someone you care about. Perhaps this is what it means to grow up. The wedding was held at a luxury hotel, just as Millie had wished. Dressed in a pure white wedding gown, Millie was undeniably beautiful, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but feel the stark differences between her and my mother. I forced a smile as I attended the ceremony as a bridesmaid. Throughout the entire ceremony, my mother's photo was never once displayed on the altar. The new life that followed was more painful than I had imagined. Millie began changing things in the house one by one. The older, homey furniture was entirely replaced with modern pieces, and the wallpaper was redone in bright tones. My mother's keepsakes were quietly moved to the storage room. "Outdated things aren't necessary for a new family," Millie said, packing away my mother's cherished items into cardboard boxes. My father just stood by in silence. One rainy day, I secretly peeked into the storage room. From a dusty cardboard box, I found an old recipe notebook. Flipping through the pages written in my mother's delicate handwriting, I saw the recipe for the omelet I had always loved. In the margin, there was a note that read, "Happy birthday, Sally." Tracing the words blurred by my tears, I let myself sink into memories of my mother. Her figure standing in the kitchen, her gentle hands holding a knife, her smile as she let me taste the food. These were treasures only I could understand, something Millie could never replace. That night, I secretly brought the recipe notebook to my room. It might have been a small act of defiance, but I wanted to protect even a small piece of my mother's warmth. After that, I began secretly taking some of my mother's belongings from the storage room. I hid her photo in my room, placing it where I could see it, and at night I would quietly talk to her. "Mom, what should I do?" There was no response, but my mother in the photo smiled gently. Not long after the wedding, my father and Millie had a baby boy named Derek. By then, I had turned 12. The arrival of this tiny new life stirred complex emotions within me. Derek was an adorable baby, with round eyes and chubby cheeks. Occasionally, he would make expressions that reminded me of my mother. In those moments, I felt a strange mix of emotions. This child was undoubtedly my brother, but he had no blood connection to my mother. After Derek was born, Millie's attitude became even more domineering. "Now we can finally be a real family," she said. Behind those words, I sensed her intent to exclude me. Even so, I tried my best to be kind to Derek. I read him picture books and took him to the park. I couldn't bring myself to direct hatred toward his innocent smile. However, Millie didn't seem pleased with the bond I was forming with Derek. She did everything she could to alienate me from the family. She spread rumors among relatives, claiming I had mental issues or lacked social skills. My father believed her words, and I gradually became isolated. One day, I discovered that cash was missing from my desk drawer. At a family gathering, Millie brought up my so-called shoplifting habit with a concerned tone. Lately, money keeps disappearing from the house. Millie trailed off, but I'm sure there must be a reason. Teenagers often have troubles they can't share with anyone. I desperately denied her accusations, but Millie's performance was flawless. With tears in her eyes, Millie pleaded, "I'm truly worried about you." Her performance drew sympathetic looks from our relatives. Afterward, strange phone calls started coming from school. They claimed that stationery with other students' names had been found among my belongings. I had never put them there. My father didn't scold me, but his eyes reflected deep disappointment. "I want to believe you." Those words hurt me even more deeply. Later, I accidentally caught Millie sneaking into my room. She was trying to put something into my desk drawer. In that moment, everything made sense, but I knew no one would believe my words. Derek's presence was the only thing that kept me barely sane. Every time his innocent smile saved me, I struggled desperately not to lose myself. Even so, Millie couldn't stand that. "Don't make Derek uneasy. Being around someone like you is a bad influence," she repeated. Millie did everything she could to sever my connection with Derek. My isolation deepened day by day. I had no one to talk to, and no one believed me. It felt like being trapped in a deep well. Eventually, I began avoiding being at home. In middle school, I spent my afternoons at the library. In high school, I threw myself into a part-time job at a cafe. When I went to college, I left home. Millie mocked me, saying, "What an emotional child," but my resolve was already firm. I refused financial support from my father and supported myself with scholarships and part-time jobs. Living alone was challenging, but it was liberating. I was able to decorate my room exactly as I wanted, without anyone interfering. As time passed, I got a job at an advertising agency. I kept my interactions with my parents to a minimum. I only gave updates on my life once every few years. As for Derek, we exchanged birthday cards a few times a year at most. Then, when I turned 30, I met Benton. I met him through work. His family had achieved great success in real estate development and owned numerous properties in the city. At one point, I was assigned to an advertising project for his real estate company. As we had more meetings, the distance between us naturally narrowed. Benton had a unique sense of warmth and acceptance. Even when I became overly meticulous from nerves, he gently said, "You don't need to be so tense." Those words gradually helped me let my guard down. When we started thinking about marriage, I decided to share my past with him. I told him about the conflict with my stepmother, the estrangement from my father, and the emotional wounds that still hadn't healed. After I finished, Benton held my hand gently after a long silence. "That must have been hard for you." At those words, tears spilled from my eyes. "But despite everything, you've made it this far on your own. That strength of yours is what I think drew me to you." As he said that, Benton hugged me. After we got married, Benton never pressured me to take on household chores. "Don't push yourself. Just take it one step at a time." For someone like me, who feared being expected to create a perfect home, those words were a great comfort. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, distressed by nightmares. During those times, Benton quietly rubs my back. There are no intrusive words or excessive sympathy. Simply being there and accepting my presence. "Family isn't necessarily about blood ties," Benton said one day, almost to himself. "We can build our family together. I want it to be a place where your heart can find peace." Those words made me feel as if a burden I had carried for years had slightly lifted. Benton never blamed me for my fragile heart. Instead, he gently embraced it, giving me the time I needed to heal. Sometimes I still get overwhelmed thinking about my childhood home. But Benton's words, "Take things at your own pace," give me the courage to move forward little by little. One day, a phone call from my father changed everything. "Sally, it's been a while. Derek is moving into his own place, and, well, the apartment is managed by Benton's company." I caught my breath. It was true that Benton's company owned some of the most prominent properties in the city, but I never expected my brother to move into one. "We're planning a housewarming party. I thought it'd be great if the whole family could get together for the first time in ages." The moment I heard those words, I froze. Benton's company had strict regulations for its luxury apartments. Among them was a clear prohibition against new tenants hosting parties to ensure the privacy and peace of other residents. "So, Sally, I was hoping you could handle the catering. You'll take care of it, right?" For a moment I thought about warning him, but 25 years of humiliation held me back. This might be my chance. "Got it," I replied. "I'll handle everything." I placed an order for a lavish course meal with my friend Paula, who was a chef. I told Paula that I would cover all the expenses. Looking confused, she asked, "Are you sure about this?" I smiled and replied, "Yes, it's a rare family gathering." On the day of the party, I dressed in my finest outfit and headed to the venue. When I opened the door, I saw a scene that hadn't changed in 25 years. The relatives were gathered around Millie at the center of the room. "Oh, my Sally," Millie said in her silky voice. "You came. Still as plain-looking as ever. But I didn't expect you to come at all, considering your social anxiety." The relatives chuckled softly. My father wore an uneasy expression but said nothing. Sally, Derek called out to me, "Mom used to talk about you a lot. Are you feeling okay? I heard you've been struggling with mental health, and that you're not great with people." I smiled quietly. I glanced at the clock. The food would arrive in 30 minutes. "So, how's work going?" Millie asked with a sly smile. "I heard you're working at a big advertising agency. It's surprising you managed to get into a place like that. You must have been very lucky. But is there even a job you can handle with your fragile mental state?" I continued to smile silently. Perhaps mistaking my silence for weakness, Millie didn't hold back her attacks. "Well, I suppose you're doing your best in your own way. You're probably surrounded by people who help you out. Everyone must be sympathizing with you because of your illness." As the relatives chuckled hesitantly, Millie basked in her sense of superiority and kept going. "Your husband must have married you out of pity, right? I mean, someone like you, with such fragile mental health, it's not normal for anyone to want to be with a person like that." My father remained silent, staring at the floor. Derek stood beside his mother, looking visibly uncomfortable. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just stating the truth. Am I going to be made the villain again?" Millie theatrically placed her hand on her chest. I checked the clock again. 15 minutes to go. I stood there quietly, a faint smile curling at the corner of my lips. Right on schedule, the food arrived. Luxurious appetizers, main courses, and desserts, each made from the finest ingredients, custom ordered. "This is such wonderful food," Millie said. "But are you sure you can afford such expensive catering? Can your salary even cover it?" Laughter erupted again. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I pulled out my smartphone and called the apartment management company, putting it on speaker for everyone to hear. "This is property management," came the answer. "This is Sally, Benton's wife." "Oh, Mrs. Benton," the tone on the other end immediately shifted. "I'd like to confirm Clause 7 of Derek's lease agreement. Parties are explicitly prohibited, and violations lead to immediate eviction, correct?" The room fell silent, the air frozen. Yes, that's correct. Housewarming parties are strictly prohibited. If a violation is confirmed, it results in immediate termination of the lease. The color drained from Millie's face. My father stood in stunned silence. There's actually a party happening right now, with over 30 guests, I said. What? That's Millie tried to interrupt. I also have photographic evidence, I continued. It's even being live-streamed on social media. This is a serious breach of contract. The voice from the management company grew stern. Derek, looking confused, turned to my father. What's going on? Was there really such a clause in the contract? My father, looking resigned, began to explain. Well, it was written in the contract, no parties allowed. But Millie said it would be fine. Mom, Derek's voice now carried a tone of anger. Why didn't you check? You've jeopardized my lease agreement. Millie's expression shifted dramatically. It's fine. Sally's husband manages the property, doesn't he? You're the wife of the owner. You can do something about this. It's just a family gathering. This isn't merely a family matter, I said. It's a matter of a formal lease agreement. My father looked at us with a confused expression. Sally, why have you become so cold? The one who's cold is you, Dad, I replied, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Ever since Mom passed away, you've never once thought about how I felt. And now you call this a family. Millie protested vehemently. You have no idea how much we've struggled. Just because I'm not your real mother, you treat your stepmother so cruelly. At that moment, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, it was Benton. He pulled out his phone. Well then, I'll have to notify the police. This is a breach of contract. The atmosphere froze. My father, pale-faced, stared at Millie, while Millie trembled with anger. Sally, please, my father pleaded, looking at me with desperate eyes. Just this once. Can't you let it go? I shook my head. Rules are rules. There can be no exceptions. In the end, the party was canceled. The relatives who had gathered left with dissatisfaction written all over their faces, while Millie sobbed hysterically. Although the police were called, they confirmed that it was a civil matter to be resolved in court, and nothing more happened that day. However, the act of involving the police undoubtedly served as a stern warning to them. That evening, I received a long email from my father. Dear Sally, today's events may have left a permanent scar on our relationship as father and daughter. I understand your decision, but as a parent, I am deeply saddened. Millie has tried to accept you as her daughter, yet you continue to hurt her. Enough is enough. Please stop trampling on our hearts any further. If it means cutting ties with you, I have no choice but to side with Millie. Goodbye. Dad. I read that email over and over again. I felt sad, but I had no regrets. It's over, I told Benton. He silently embraced me. In the end, the apartment lease was voided due to the contract violation. Later, Derek visited me at my office. Sally, I'm really sorry. I had read the contract properly, but Mom kept insisting it'll be fine and pushed through. You even found me a new place within my budget. I don't know how to thank you. Don't worry about it, I replied. Benton worked it out with the management company. But there's one thing I've realized, Derek continued with a serious expression. I'm done blindly trusting everything Mom says. For 25 years she kept isolating you, and I see now it's been the same pattern over and over. She always said, leave your sister alone, she's sick, but that was wrong too. Derek took my hand. Things are going to be different from now on. I'm here for you. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Ironically, this incident strengthened the bond between me and my brother. 3 years have passed since then. I've had no contact with my father or Millie. Derek and I still talk occasionally, and he sometimes joins my family for meals. Through Derek, I've heard updates about our parents. Apparently, my father and Millie are moving toward divorce. The catalyst was the events at that party. It became clear that I was thriving in my career at the advertising agency and had never suffered from any mental illness. Benton's real estate business has also been very successful, and our reputation as a couple is highly regarded within the industry. When it became clear that Millie's rumors were all lies, the attitude of our relatives changed completely. My father began to deeply regret how, for 25 years, he had ignored his daughter's words and blindly followed his wife. "I believed everything you said." He reportedly said this during an argument with Millie. Millie still refuses to back down from her confident stance. But she has lost the trust of those around her and is now isolated. Ironically, she has ended up in the same position I once was. My father has contacted me several times. His messages are filled with apologies and pleas for reconciliation. But I find myself unable to respond. While I can forgive, I know we can never return to the relationship we once had. Blood ties do not necessarily guarantee love or understanding. Now, I have my own family. In these 3 years, Benton and I have been blessed with a daughter, Lily. She has brought new joy into my life. A photo of my mother is displayed prominently in our living room. Sometimes I tell Lily stories about her grandmother. Your grandma was a very kind person. When I say that, a warm feeling rises within me. Some bonds are lost while others are newly formed. That's what life is, I suppose. On weekends, I take Lily to visit my mother's grave. As I press my hands together in prayer, I speak to her in my heart. "Mom, I'm happy now. The love you taught me, I will pass it on to Lily." When the wind blows, the flowers on the grave gently sway. It feels as if my mother is nodding softly in approval. I have chosen to live facing forward. It wasn't an easy choice, but it is the right path for me. My name is Isabella Hansen, and I'm 32 years old. I am a director at Powell Corporation. I've poured my passion into my work, steadily climbing the career ladder. As I traced the rim of my coffee cup, I gazed out at the Manhattan skyline through the large glass window, a view that was the result of 10 years of dedicated work. To others, my life might seem like a picture of success. However, behind my success were sacrifices I've made since childhood. I am the eldest of 3 sisters, with Jocelyn 2 years and Lindsay 6 years younger. Both of my parents worked, always busy with their jobs and managing household chores. It was just after Lindsay was born when my mother said, "Isabella, can you watch Lindsay for a bit?" "I'll be right back." That a bit turned into 3 hours, and I continued to soothe the crying Lindsay. When my mother returned, she said, "You're such a lifesaver, Isabella. Not many could do what you do." That was the beginning. Soon after, for every small errand like shopping or dining with friends, my mother started leaving my sisters with me. While my friends played outside after school, I was at home taking care of 4-year-old Jocelyn and baby Lindsay. One summer day when I was 12 years old, my parents called to say they would be late from work. With nothing in the fridge, I opened a cookbook and decided to make pasta sauce from scratch. I stood in the kitchen, clumsily chopping tomatoes, crushing garlic, and dicing leftover vegetables. Considering it was my first time cooking, I thought it turned out pretty well. My parents were delighted and said, "Isabella, we'll count on you for dinner from now on." From that day, preparing weekday dinners became my special job, and I started making dinner before doing homework. As I turned down more invitations to play, "Isabella is busy" became synonymous with me. By the time I was 16 years old, I was managing most of the household chores. Mornings involved waking up my sisters, preparing breakfast, and then off to school. Evenings were for shopping and dinner prep. Weekends meant laundry and cleaning. One day, I expressed my desire to audition for the school play. My mother looked puzzled and said, "But the house can't function without you." My father added, "Isabella is so responsible, she would prioritize family over anything else." That night, I quietly cried in my room. Like many other dreams, my acting ambitions were sidelined for the needs of my family. I vividly remember the spring break of my 18th year. For the last spring break of high school, I had planned a trip to Miami Beach with friends. Saving money from a part-time job for 6 months, it was to be my first trip just with friends. My suitcase was packed, and the plane ticket was ready. On the eve of departure, my parents suddenly appeared in the living room. "Isabella, we need to talk," my mother said with a regretful look. My father continued, "We have to go to Texas unexpectedly tomorrow because your grandmother, who was supposed to watch Lindsay and Jocelyn, fell ill. Can you take care of your sisters?" My heart sank. "But I'm supposed to go to Miami tomorrow." "I've been planning this for 6 months." "I know, but it's an emergency," my mother explained. "You're the only one we can rely on." "What about Grandpa?" I asked, feeling hopeful. "He's working?" she replied. "But my ticket." "We'll cover the cancellation fee," my father interjected. "We trust you with Jocelyn and Lindsay. They rely on you, and we know you can handle it." Ultimately, my Miami dream was crushed. As I received fun photos and videos from my friends, I spent the weekend looking after 16-year-old Jocelyn and 12-year-old Lindsay. And the weekend my parents were supposed to be away ultimately extended to a whole week. Later, I learned that my parents were actually at a couples retreat. "Sometimes, we need time for ourselves," my mother said when I confronted her with the truth. It was a time built on my sacrifices. In college, I managed to get scholarships and continued working part-time to cover some of my tuition fees. However, the situation changed when I learned that Jocelyn had been accepted into a prestigious private university. "Isabella, fantastic news," my mother excitedly announced over the phone. "Jocelyn got into Princeton." "Congratulations," I sincerely responded. Jocelyn was always studious. "But there's one problem," my mother continued. "The tuition, and with Lindsay coming up, it's a bit tough for us alone." I immediately understood. "Mom, I don't have that kind of money." "But you're receiving a scholarship, right? Plus, you work part-time." "That's for my tuition." "Jocelyn should work part-time too." "Isabella, Princeton is an opportunity for Jocelyn. Unfortunately, she didn't receive a scholarship, and she wants to focus on her studies." My father joined the conversation. "Shouldn't we help each other as a family?" In the end, I took on an additional part-time job. I worked at a campus cafe in the morning and as a waitress at a bar at night. Between classes and work, I was constantly running around, working from morning till night on weekends. I had no social life, and I was always short on sleep. This went on for 2 years. Part of my income went towards Jocelyn's tuition, and the rest covered my own tuition and living expenses. On the day of my college graduation, I felt a mix of emotions. My college years were a struggle, getting through with sleep deprivation and juggling 2 jobs. Only my father attended the graduation ceremony. My mother was with Jocelyn at a university event, and Lindsay was busy with her final exams. "Sorry, Isabella. But you'll be fine, right?" "You're always so independent," my father said. I started my career at Powell Corporation as an analyst. Among the 30 new hires, I worked the longest hours. I was the first to arrive in the morning and the last to leave at night. This work ethic caught my boss's attention, and I was promoted to lead analyst after 2 years. 5 years later, I became a manager, and now I lead a team of 15 as a director. Whenever there was a major family event, I was called upon. When Jocelyn married Scott at 23 years old, I managed all aspects of the wedding from its planning to execution. "Isabella, you're so organized," my mother said. 2 weeks before the wedding, I was buried in a major project deadline. I worked late into the night every day and gave up weekends to prepare for the wedding. On the day of the ceremony, I served as the maid of honor while solving every issue from catering mishaps to guest problems. Lindsay married her college boyfriend Brian when she was 22 years old. He was a young lawyer, and they soon bought a suburban house. I also ran around behind the scenes at their wedding. A year after their marriage, Lindsay announced her pregnancy. When Alex was born, I visited their house every weekend to help with household chores and childcare. "Isabella, we don't know what we would do without you," she said, but she never mentioned how this impacted my own social life and rest. Jocelyn's marriage became complicated. After the birth of their second child, her relationship with Scott worsened, and they got divorced when she was 28 years old. Scott was never home due to his long work hours, and I was left to handle the childcare alone. Jocelyn explained tearfully. After the divorce, Jocelyn, who had been a stay-at-home mom, faced financial difficulties. She moved back in with our parents, but it was a significant financial strain on them. I helped with the household expenses every month. "It's only temporary. I'll get back on my feet soon," Jocelyn assured me, but that temporary situation has lasted over 2 years now. Lindsay's family life seemed successful on the surface. However, she and Brian, both working full-time, often relied on me to care for their 2 children on weekends. The kids called me Auntie Isabella and were fond of me. "You're so good with kids," was the excuse that took away my free weekends. Yet my family never seemed to sacrifice anything for me. Last year on my birthday, I sat alone in my apartment. My phone didn't ring once. My mother was at a party with friends, Jocelyn was on a date with her new boyfriend, and Lindsay was on a weekend trip with her husband. "Happy birthday, Isabella." I toasted to myself and poured a glass of wine. The next day, I received a belated text from my mother. "Happy birthday, Isabella. Sorry I couldn't get in touch, we were busy. By the way, can you look after Alex and Christina next week? Lindsay and Brian need a little break." This is how I never had the time or energy to develop a romantic relationship. I did date a few men, but many relationships ended with, "I have to take care of my sister's kids this weekend, it's my niece's birthday party," or "there's a family emergency." "Isabella?" My train of thought was interrupted, and I turned to see my assistant Tiffany standing at the door. "It's a call from Lindsay. Will you take it?" I nodded while organizing a pile of documents. "Thanks, I'll take it." "Isabella, how are you?" Lindsay's voice came through the speaker. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course," I replied, pushing aside a report. "What's up?" I was only half listening, still reviewing the quarterly figures. "Mom's turning 60 years old in 2 months. It's her birthday. Remember?" Lindsay said excitedly. "And Mom is retiring from her job, right? I want to plan a special trip to commemorate it." We all want to chip in for it, but Jocelyn doesn't have the means. I also have educational expenses and a home mortgage, so I can only contribute a little. That caught my attention. "How much are we talking about?" I almost spit out my coffee when Lindsay replied. The amount was equivalent to 3 months of my salary. "I know it's a lot." Lindsay quickly added, "But it's for Mom." "That's fine." I hesitated for a moment, but then stopped myself from thinking too much, as usual. "I'll send the money right now?" I said this as I opened my bank app. "Thank you." Lindsay's voice was filled with relief. "Oh, and one more thing. I need you to take a week off work for the celebration. It's a special plan. I'll keep the destination a surprise until the day we leave. Jocelyn and I have everything arranged. And make sure you don't schedule any work during that time." I got it. After that conversation, weeks flew by with meetings and deadlines. I occasionally wondered what my sisters were planning with that money, but whenever I asked, I only got vague responses. Work took priority, and Mom's birthday celebration was pushed to the back of my mind. Then, the designated day arrived. I closed an important deal, leaving the office with a feeling of comfortable exhaustion. It was finally time for Mom's birthday celebration. According to messages from my sisters, we were to gather at our parents' house and leave from there. I loaded my carry-on into the car and headed to my parents' home. When I arrived, I noticed several familiar cars parked on the street. I pressed the doorbell lightly, expecting my dad to open the door as usual, but instead, Jocelyn's 5-year-old son Matt appeared. "Auntie Isabella," he exclaimed joyfully. "Hello, Matt." I smiled, though I was a bit confused. "Where's Mom?" "Everyone went out," he answered nonchalantly. I entered the house and made my way to the living room, where I found 3 kids scattered about. Lindsay's baby Christina was sleeping on a play mat, and her 3-year-old son Alex was playing with blocks. Jocelyn's daughter Hannah was drawing. However, no adults were in sight. "Where did everyone go?" I asked Matt. He shrugged. "I don't know. Grandpa said that Auntie Isabella would be here soon and to stay quiet until then." I hurried to the dining table. There was an envelope there with my name on it. With trembling hands, I opened it and found the following note. "Isabella, we've already left for a week at Sunnyside Resort. This is our adults' only trip. After years tied down by childcare, we finally get to enjoy some freedom without the kids. We've stocked the fridge with food for the kids. The emergency contact list is on the kitchen counter. Make sure Alex gets his medicine at 4 p.m. Don't worry, we'll take lots of pictures to show you when we get back. Enjoying adult conversations and cocktails. Love, Mom. P.S. Jocelyn checked the resort's babysitting service, but it was fully booked. The kids are comfortable with you, and this was the best way. Don't take it the wrong way. Just do your best for us as usual." There was no other way. I read the note again, in disbelief. They had really left me behind. Without consulting me, without my consent. And with my own money. I took out my phone and called Mom immediately. It went to voicemail. I tried Lindsay, then Jocelyn, with the same result. Finally, after several attempts, Lindsay answered. "Hey, Isabella." She sounded hesitant. "Have you arrived at the house?" "Lindsay, what is this?" I asked, struggling to keep my anger in check. "You left me behind?" "Listen, Isabella." She became defensive. "It wasn't my idea. Mom said Isabella is always so responsible and reliable. She'll understand. I didn't agree to look after the kids," I said. "I was looking forward to this trip too. But you get along with the kids," Lindsay excused. "And since you're single and don't have children, you don't really need a vacation like this, do you? We just want to enjoy some adult time. We've been tied down by the kids for so long, don't we deserve a little break?" Her words broke something inside me. "Listen, I'll call a professional babysitter right now. That way, I can catch a flight and join you." "That won't work," Lindsay exclaimed. "We can't leave the kids with someone they don't know. Alex gets anxious around strangers, and Christina is still a baby. Honestly, we just want some time away from the kids. Isabella, please. Can you watch them for us? Just like you always do." "Just like I always do?" I repeated, feeling the anger rise. "Yes, you're always so dependable. Ever since you were little," she said nonchalantly. "You've always done everything for us." Something clicked in my head. "For everyone?" I said in a low voice. "Yes, always for everyone. But Lindsay, this time it's different." "I won't do it." "What do you mean?" Panic tinged Lindsay's voice. "I'm calling a professional," I stated firmly, "for the children's safety." "Professional? What do you mean?" "Isabella, stop." I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, but my next steps were clear. I called the police and explained the situation. Next, I contacted the National Child Abuse Hotline. They promised immediate action. After that, I sent the same text message to the entire family. The children have been left unsupervised. I have reported this to the police and Child Protective Services. I suggest you come back immediately. Within minutes, my phone began to ring. I ignored it. Instead, I sat down in the living room and began playing with the kids, ensuring they did not feel anxious. About an hour later, a police car arrived at the house. 2 officers entered and began assessing the situation. 30 minutes later, a social worker from Child Protective Services also arrived. I explained everything to them. As the sun began to set, the front door burst open, and my panicked mother rushed in. Behind her were Lindsay, Jocelyn, and the rest of the family. "Isabella," my mother exclaimed. "What have you done?" An officer stepped forward and asked, "Are you the guardian of these children?" My mother, cheeks flushed, replied, "Yes, I'm their grandmother." What happened? The situation of minors being left without proper supervision was discovered by Ms. Hansen, who appropriately reported it to the authorities, the officer stated sternly. "But," my mother faltered, "Isabella was supposed to take care of them." She agreed. "No, Mom," I said quietly. "I didn't hear about it, nor did I agree. You all just assumed." The social worker stepped forward and requested identification from all the adults. They were then asked to accompany the police to the station. After hours of questioning and explanations, the police contacted me to clarify the situation. Meanwhile, I stayed at the house with the children. Ultimately, my parents and sisters were charged with child neglect. The children were temporarily placed under my supervision. The family was enveloped in shock and shame. They returned from the police late that night. The next morning, I gathered everyone in the living room. The children were playing in another room. "I have always said yes," I began calmly. "Even when I was tired from work, even when I had important meetings. I always helped you. But this time, you crossed a line. You took my time, my money, and my dignity." "But Isabella," my mother said through tears, "you've always done everything for the family." "That's the problem, Mom," I said. "You've forgotten that I have a life of my own. My choices, my hopes, my dreams. I love my family, but I'm done being taken advantage of." "Don't you like the kids?" Jocelyn asked in a soft voice. "Of course I love them," I replied. "But loving them and being forced to take care of them for a week without prior consultation, while the rest of the family goes on a vacation with my money, are completely different issues." Silence took over the room. I stated firmly, "You all need to face the consequences of your actions. I have sacrificed for you for many years. I've had enough." "Isabella," my mother exclaimed in shock, "we raised you." "Yes, you raised me," I said quietly. "I am grateful for that. But that doesn't give you the right to use me indefinitely. From childhood, I was the one who looked after Lindsay and Jocelyn when we got home from school. While they played with friends, I was the one preparing dinner and helping with homework." "That's because you were the eldest," my father excused. "No," I shook my head. "It's because you took advantage of me. You knew I was responsible and wouldn't say no. But that doesn't mean we're not family," Jocelyn exclaimed. "Family?" I laughed. "Being family means it's okay to go on a trip with the money I provided, without my consent, and leave me to look after 4 kids? Is it okay to take for granted all the sacrifices I've made for the family?" The family fell silent. Anger, sadness, and fear appeared on their faces. "What should we do now?" Lindsay asked in a low voice. "That's for you to figure out," I said. "I'm going to live my own life." A year had passed. After the intervention of the police and Child Protective Services, my family paid a significant price. My parents were charged with child neglect and were ordered to do community service. Lindsay and Brian and Jocelyn faced restricted custody of their children, with supervised visits and mandatory parenting classes. My father's business partner terminated their contracts out of fear of scandal, and our family's financial situation rapidly deteriorated. I had cut off contact with all of them. At first, tearful calls from my mother and angry messages from Lindsay and Jocelyn flooded in. They claimed I had overreacted and accused me of betraying the family. However, those gradually subsided. One rainy afternoon, there was a knock at my office door. "There's someone here to see you," Tiffany said. "It's your mother." I took a deep breath. Let her in. My mother had aged, her shoulders slumped. Gone was her once confident posture, replaced by weariness and a sense of defeat. "Isabella," she said in a small voice. "Thank you for seeing me. What do you want?" I asked calmly. "I came to apologize," she said. "And to ask for help." "What kind of help?" "We're on the verge of bankruptcy," she confessed, holding back tears. "Your father has lost his job, and my retirement funds were drained by legal fees. Lindsay and Jocelyn are struggling to regain custody of their children. And I need a loan," she finally said. "Help us." I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. In the past, I would have immediately opened my wallet and helped my family, as I always had. "Mom," I said slowly, "I drew a clear boundary a year ago. You took advantage of me and took my kindness for granted. You never considered my feelings or my life. But you're our daughter." My mother raised her voice. "Isn't family supposed to help each other? True family respects and supports each other," I quietly replied. "You treated me merely as a resource. That is not love." My mother began to cry, her shoulders shaking. "Then, what should I do?" "Solve it yourselves," I said. "As adults." She looked at me with a look of despair. "You were never this cold." "I've changed, Mom," I smiled. "I finally learned to value myself." After she left, I reflected deeply. That incident made me reassess my life. Work remained important, but I also built new friendships and began to cherish my own time. I started volunteering, truly reaching out to those in need. Sometimes, I think about my family. I wonder how they are doing, especially the children. But the realization from that night remains unchanged. Saying no can be the most powerful form of self-affirmation. Protecting my boundaries is the deepest form of self-love. My desk is piled with documents for a new project. This weekend, I have a trip to Europe planned with friends. I no longer need to adjust my life to someone else's schedule. I am living at my own pace. And now, this freedom is what I value most. It happened in the spring when I was 10 years old. It was a day our family would never forget. My father was making his special pancakes on a Sunday morning. The sweet, fragrant aroma wafted from the kitchen, while the sound of my mother humming as she set the table created a comforting background melody. My father had a knack for making pancakes shaped like bears and stars to make me laugh. Sunday mornings spent together were the epitome of our family routine. That morning, my father was his usual cheerful self, waving the frying pan like a magic wand. "Princess Jean, your special pancakes are ready," he said playfully. Leaving my favorite bunny plushie on the sofa, I eagerly ran to the kitchen. Little did I know that the event that followed would change our family forever. Suddenly, my father clutched his chest, and the spatula clattered noisily to the floor. At that moment, it felt as though time had stopped. I saw my father's face contort in pain, and he let out a soundless scream. My mother, though shaken, quickly grabbed the phone to call an ambulance, but I could only stand there frozen. I remember blankly watching as the ambulance arrived and took my father away. The sound of the siren echoed in the air. In the hospital's white corridor, I vividly recall seeing my mother collapse into tears. That day, my father passed away due to a heart attack. It was so sudden that we had no time to prepare. After my father was gone, The house was enveloped in an empty silence. The laughter and sweet smell of pancakes that once filled our home were replaced by a lifeless void. My mother tried to support me despite her grief, but she was also consumed by a profound sense of loss. About a year after my father's death, my mother met Solomon, her new partner. Solomon was tall and had kind, gentle eyes. He became a comforting presence, slowly filling the void in our hearts. They met through a support group for widows, and he exuded a reassuring warmth that reminded us of my father. When Solomon started visiting our home, the atmosphere began to change little by little. He helped me with my math homework and listened when I had a bad day at school. Even so, it took time for him to be accepted as part of our family. Eventually, my mother decided to remarry, and Solomon moved in with us a few months later. Around the time Solomon became a part of our family, we were blessed with a new life. I still clearly remember the day my mother told me, "You're going to be a big sister." Her eyes sparkled with excitement, but my heart was filled with mixed emotions. As our family took on a new form, the days when my father was with us felt increasingly distant. When my little sister was born, my mother's attention turned entirely to that tiny new presence. She decided to quit her job and devote herself to caring for my sister. This early childhood period is so crucial for a child's development, she often said. But to me, those words felt like an announcement that I was no longer a priority in our family. As my mother became immersed in taking care of my sister, my daily life gradually changed. I came home from school to find no lunch prepared, and when I spoke to my mother, her ears were tuned only to my sister's cries. At the dinner table, my mother often ate while holding my sister, and I felt as though I wasn't even there. "Jean, do you know? Sometimes people become so absorbed in one thing that they forget about everything else," Solomon told me after dinner one evening. His words gave me a small sense of relief, but it didn't change the fact that my place in the family still felt unstable. Thus, our family, having lost my father, spent each day grappling with loneliness and inner conflicts as we tried to find a new form of togetherness. With Solomon becoming part of the family and the birth of my sister, our household took on a new shape. However, this change was not necessarily comfortable for me. My mother devoted herself entirely to caring for my sister, and her attention toward me gradually faded. It felt as though I had become an unimportant member of the family. Solomon tried hard to maintain balance in the household. He would take me to the park on weekends and attend school events. Even so, every time I saw my mother so engrossed with my sister, I felt a small seed of loneliness take root in my heart. That seed grew steadily over time. My mother often said, "This time is so important for her future." While I knew she wasn't lying, the phrase "for her future" felt like a denial of my present. One evening, Solomon knocked on my door and quietly spoke to me. "Jean, I understand that you feel like you're not being cared for, but you are important. Please don't forget that." His words felt like a lifeline to me. Still, every time I saw the unshakable bond between my mother and sister, I felt as though I was losing my place within the family. While Solomon tried to be there for me, my mother's unwavering focus on my sister left the atmosphere at home somewhat strained. A growing gap slowly formed between my mother and me. I still remember the day my sister first said, "Mama." The moment my mother heard it, she beamed with tears of joy and hugged my sister tightly. Watching that scene, I was overcome with a strange mix of happiness and sadness. It felt like I was part of the family, yet somehow observing it from the outside. As I watched my mother's love for my sister deepen day by day, I began to feel as though I was being pushed further away from the heart of the family. That sense of loneliness started to take root in my heart during this time. As my sister grew, my mother's expectations for her only grew larger. She became busy enrolling my sister in music and art classes, and our family's days revolved around those schedules. My mother's voice was always gentle when she spoke to my sister, and she celebrated even her smallest successes with exaggerated joy. In contrast, whenever I shared my achievements at school or in club activities, my mother would simply respond, "That's nice," before quickly shifting the conversation back to my sister. Even in such circumstances, Solomon always remained on my side. He listened to me attentively and sometimes encouraged me by saying, "You're really putting in a lot of effort." I can't express how much those words saved me. Without him, I might have been completely crushed by the loneliness I felt within the family. However, despite Solomon's efforts, the distance between my mother and me only grew wider. I felt as though my sister was the center of the family, while I was merely a satellite orbiting around her. This feeling became increasingly vivid as I grew older. On the surface, our family appeared peaceful, but inside me, small frustrations accumulated and gradually turned into a deep sense of loneliness. At the same time, tension began to arise between Solomon and my mother. Solomon tried to maintain fairness within the family, but he, too, started questioning my mother's excessive attention toward my sister. One evening during dinner, my sister pushed her plate away, refusing to eat. My mother sat beside her, patiently trying to persuade her, saying, "Just one more bite." Watching this, Solomon put down his fork and said, "Sally, you need to let her become more independent. You can't do everything for her." My mother's face immediately stiffened as she replied, "Are you saying I'm a bad mother?" Solomon responded calmly, "That's not what I'm saying. But she's not the only child in this family. Jean is your daughter too." However, it seemed those words didn't reach my mother. She retorted firmly, "She's still so young. She needs special care." The situation settled down somehow, but Solomon's words left a deep impression on me. Day by day, Solomon continued to try to support me. One day, he suggested that I join a karate class. I accepted his suggestion, and Solomon drove me to and from the class several times a week. The conversations we had on the way home after practice became a source of comfort for me. When I earned a belt during a match, I still remember how he cheered louder than any other parent. While I grew through my time with Solomon, the tension at home continued to escalate. Solomon suggested to my mother that she reduce her dependency on my sister, but instead of listening, my mother became increasingly defensive. When my sister expressed interest in trying Little League, Solomon said, "This could be a great opportunity." However, my mother immediately dismissed the idea. "Baseball is too dangerous. It's safer for her to attend art classes instead," she insisted, leaving Solomon speechless. Even in the art class chosen for my sister, she showed little enthusiasm and stopped attending after the third session. When my mother found out, she only blamed the teacher, saying, "The teacher doesn't understand children's creativity." This kind of attitude from my mother seemed to distort everything within our family. Over time, Solomon began to avoid clashing with my mother. However, it wasn't because he had given in to her. Instead, he focused on supporting me. "Jean, you're always trying so hard. Do you realize how amazing that is?" Those words of encouragement from him still remain in my heart. Without him, I might have been completely crushed by the loneliness within our family. On the other hand, the cracks within our household were becoming irreparable. Solomon was doing his best for me, but he couldn't mend his relationship with my mother. From this point on, the time we spent together as a family began to decrease. It became more common for us to eat dinner separately. The situation where my sister was the center of the family remained unchanged, and Solomon and I felt like isolated entities orbiting around her. By the time I was about to graduate high school, I had one clear goal in my heart. It was to leave the house and live an independent life. Exhausted from the loneliness and strained relationships with my mother and sister, I strongly wished to start a new life by going to college. My mother didn't seem to take my college plans seriously. While I was choosing schools, she would talk only about my sister's lessons and school events. Even when I asked for her opinion about my future, she would only give a curt response like, "Go wherever you like." On the other hand, Solomon continued to cheer me on. "Jean, the sky is the limit. Go wherever you want," he said, encouraging me. His words were my only source of support. On the day of my high school graduation, I wore my cap and gown and looked out at the audience from the stage. I saw Solomon smiling proudly at me. Next to him was my mother, who was staring at her smartphone, seemingly texting the babysitter for my sister. That scene felt like a symbol of my position within the family. The day after the graduation ceremony, Solomon called me into his study. Holding a folder in his hand, he said, "I've been saving bit by bit." He showed me brochures from various universities. "Jean, you can go anywhere. I want to help you carve out your future," he said, his words bringing tears to my eyes. However, when my mother heard about this, she argued, "That money should be used for your sister's future," leading to a heated argument with Solomon. That night, Solomon told me, "Jean, I'm not backing down on this. You have the right to your freedom." Encouraged by his words, I decided to go to college. In the end, I chose Marshall University in West Virginia. It was a place where I could maintain a suitable distance from my family while starting a new chapter in life. When college began, I tasted freedom for the first time. Being freed from the shadow of my family, I realized how precious it was to have my own time. I devoted myself to my studies, enjoyed time with friends, and pursued things I had always wanted to do. However, my relationship with my family grew increasingly distant. My mother rarely contacted me, and the only connection I had was through phone calls with Solomon. "Jean, your mother still seems busy with your sister," Solomon said during one of our calls. There was fatigue in his voice as he continued, "She's doing her best to raise her, but that doesn't necessarily mean things are heading in the right direction." I couldn't find the words to respond. Living away from my family gave me a new perspective. I rediscovered my own worth and was in the process of healing old wounds. At the same time, I realized that the problems within my family were unfolding beyond my reach, leaving me with complex feelings. A few years after graduating from college, my life was shaken by a significant event. Solomon passed away suddenly. He was the only person in my family who truly understood and supported me. His death brought me immense grief, but more than that, it revealed how completely the balance within our family had fallen apart. After Solomon's death, my mother began to struggle financially. Since Solomon had been the primary breadwinner, our household quickly approached the brink of collapse without him. My mother started to rely on me, especially demanding that I help fund my sister's college education. "Jean, please. If you don't help, her future will be ruined," my mother pleaded with tears in her eyes. Her words shook me. But considering my past relationship with my family and the life I had built for myself, I couldn't agree so easily. However, in the end, I decided to accept my mother's request. From then on, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously to pay for my sister's college expenses. Living a life of working from early morning until late at night drained me physically and mentally, yet I rarely received gratitude from my mother or sister. My mother accepted the money as if it were a given, and my sister showed little interest in the matter. Their cold attitudes left new scars on my heart. One day, when I visited my family home after a long time, I found it in worse condition than ever before. The garden that Solomon used to maintain was overgrown, and the living room was cluttered with my sister's belongings. My mother sat on the couch with a tired expression, barely looking at me as she muttered, "Welcome home." Seeing this, I realized that no matter how much effort I put into supporting this family, I would never be acknowledged. Eventually, the day came when my sister graduated from college and entered the workforce. My mother bought a new dress to attend the graduation ceremony, her face beaming with joy. However, behind that joy, I felt as if all my efforts had been ignored. I was left with a gaping hole in my heart. With Solomon gone, my family had become entirely focused on my mother and sister, leaving my presence increasingly insignificant. Enduring this situation was not easy, but I couldn't give up on my own life. A few years after Solomon passed away, and I had been funding my sister's college expenses, a decisive rift occurred in our family during my mother's birthday party. That day, family and relatives gathered, and on the surface, the atmosphere was pleasant. My mother was more talkative than usual, sipping wine after wine and in high spirits. During the gathering, she casually let something slip in her drunken state. "Actually, I've made a will to leave all my assets to your sister," she said with a laugh. The moment those words reached my ears, it felt as though time had stopped. It was as if my existence within this family had been completely erased. When I tried to ask why, my mother, showing no sign of remorse, replied, "Because she has her whole life ahead of her. You're already independent, aren't you?" Her words carried not a trace of gratitude or consideration for me. They simply reflected her values, which prioritized my sister above all else. In that instant, all the emotions I had buried deep inside came rushing out. How much I had sacrificed to support this family, devoting my time and money to secure my sister's future. Yet, the reality that this was how I was treated filled me with indescribable anger and sorrow. After returning home, I thought deeply. Should I continue being the sacrificial lamb for this family? What meaning was there in maintaining a relationship with my mother and sister? After much deliberation, I made a decision. I needed to distance myself from this family and reclaim my life. A few days later, I wrote a letter to my mother. The message was straightforward, expressing my resolve to cease further assistance and calmly explaining my reasons for distancing myself. "Please don't take everything I've done for granted. I have the right to live my own life," I wrote, pouring my emotions into that sentence. Additionally, I confirmed that the house my mother and sister lived in was under my name and decided to proceed with selling it. This action marked the final severance of my ties with the family. In truth, the house we lived in had been purchased by my late father in my name. It seemed my mother had forgotten this. When she realized she was losing her home, she immediately called me, but I didn't answer. Her messages were filled with anger and confusion, asking, "Why are you doing this?" But I felt no obligation to respond. I couldn't find a reason to keep sacrificing myself any longer. Since I wasn't going to inherit anything, I decided to sell the house and use the proceeds for myself. While there was sadness in letting go of something my father had given me, I saw it as a step forward. Fortunately, I quickly found a buyer, and my mother had no choice but to leave the house when the eviction notice came. After cutting ties with my mother and sister, my life changed dramatically. It was also the moment I was freed from the burden I had carried for so many years. By choosing to live for myself, I found a quiet sense of peace within my heart. The first few weeks of no contact with my family felt strange. For the first time, the time I used to spend thinking about my mother and sister had completely disappeared. To fill that void, I set new goals for myself. I focused on work, improving my skills, and finding new hobbies. One day after work, I stopped by a cafe and found an opportunity to pursue something I had wanted to do for years, joining a photography class. Photography had been one of my dreams since high school, but it had been pushed aside amid the busyness of life. Learning at that class became a new source of inspiration for me, bringing vivid color back into my life. However, the guilt from cutting ties with my family didn't completely disappear. Occasionally, I received messages from my mother. Each time I saw them, I couldn't help but question whether my decision had been the right one. Even so, I felt that not replying was the only way to protect myself. Eventually, I decided to block my mother's email address. It was a form of closure for me. Some relatives criticized me, but those who knew about the incident at my mother's birthday party defended me. Now, my mother and sister have no family they can rely on and seem to be living quietly in a rundown apartment. Having realized that the house they once lived in was not their asset, I wonder how much inheritance my mother actually has left. There are rumors that she has started working part-time, so it seems unlikely she has anything substantial to leave to my sister. Taking care of yourself is not the same as betraying someone. With those words etched in my heart, I slowly started to rebuild my life at my own pace. On my days off, I went on trips with friends and began participating in volunteer activities, making an effort to expand my social circle. A few months passed, and I finally felt that my life had reached a stable point. My new apartment was a small space, but it was a place where I felt secure. The simple furniture and the landscape photos I had taken at the photography class symbolized my new life. One afternoon, I took some time to reflect on the past. The support Solomon had given me, my efforts to help my mother and sister, and the perseverance I had shown, all of these were experiences that shaped who I am today. There were undoubtedly painful moments in my journey, moments that felt as if they would overwhelm me completely. These moments weren't fleeting, they lingered, etched into my memory like scars that told stories of survival and growth. Yet, in hindsight, I came to understand that these challenges, no matter how overwhelming they seemed at the time, ultimately made me stronger. They shaped me into someone who could face adversity, someone who could stand tall, even when the world felt like it was crumbling around me. Each struggle, each disappointment, and each sacrifice I made acted as a stepping stone, guiding me toward rediscovering my own worth. For years, I had placed others' needs above my own, questioning whether my efforts even mattered or if I deserved any happiness for myself. But now, as I reflected on all that had happened, I realized that those struggles were not in vain. While driving one day, a surprising sensation crept over me. I felt a genuine smile spreading across my face. It wasn't a forced expression or something fleeting, it was a deep and unshakable smile that came from within. It was the kind of smile that only arises when the weight of the past begins to lift and peace takes its place. I felt light, as if the heavy burdens I had carried for so long had finally been lifted off my shoulders. The chains of obligation that had tethered me to my family's problems had been broken, freeing me in ways I hadn't imagined possible. The air seemed clearer, the road smoother, and the horizon brighter. It was in that moment I realized all the struggles I had endured, the tears I cried, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices had finally paid off. They had led me here, to this sense of peace and freedom that I had thought was unattainable. Their problems, the ones that had consumed so much of my life, were no longer my problems to solve. I had stepped away from their shadows, and for the first time I could focus on myself without guilt or hesitation. I was finally ready to walk my own path, one that was shaped by my dreams, my choices, and my desires, not by the weight of others' expectations. "This is my new beginning," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible yet filled with conviction and hope. As I pressed down on the accelerator, I felt the car surge forward, responding to my will. The road ahead stretched endlessly, a winding path that disappeared into the vast horizon. Above me, the wide-open sky, with its brilliant shades of blue, felt like a promise of infinite possibilities and uncharted adventures. The journey ahead was unknown, but for the first time I wasn't afraid of what I might encounter. With each mile I drove, I felt as though I was shedding the layers of my past, the pain, the doubts, the sacrifices. I was leaving them behind, letting them fade into the distance as I focused on what lay ahead. This drive wasn't just about covering physical distance, it was about moving forward emotionally, reclaiming my sense of self, and embracing the freedom I had fought so hard to achieve. The road before me wasn't merely a path, it was a symbol of the life I was ready to build for myself, a life rooted in self-love and independence. The car hummed beneath me, steady and reliable, as if it too understood the significance of this journey. With each turn of the wheel, I felt myself moving closer to a brighter, freer, and more fulfilling future. This moment, this drive, was more than just a physical escape, it was the start of something profound. I had finally chosen myself, and that choice filled me with a joy I hadn't experienced in years. "This is my new beginning," I repeated, the words echoing in my mind like a mantra. Ahead of me stretched an open road, boundless and inviting, with a sky so vast it seemed to hold every possibility I could imagine. From a young age, I always felt like I was second best, like a shadow that was always trailing behind someone brighter and more beloved. My name is Anne. I am the younger of 2 daughters in our family, and for as long as I can remember, I have stood in the glow of my older sister Stacy. I always felt as though I was in the background. The stark contrast in the way our parents treated my sister and me was unmistakable and impossible to overlook. While Stacy was escorted to singing competitions and exclusive gatherings at my parents' club, I was left behind at home, quietly working on my homework in solitude. Being 3 years older than me, she naturally stood out and commanded attention wherever she went. It was as if she was destined to receive all the attention, treated like it was her rightful due. Because of that, it always felt like my parents' focus was solely on her. If a teacher mentioned her talent, my parents never missed the chance to nurture it. They did everything they could to bring out the best in her, while I felt like I was hidden in the shadows. Our family was not financially well off, making it difficult to afford Stacy's lessons and equipment. However, her singing voice was so captivating that my mother proudly boasted about her talent to everyone, believing she would achieve great success in the future. On the other hand, whenever I tried to show my own talents, I felt discouraged from expecting too much. When I told my mother about my interest in art, she gave a faint, apologetic smile and replied hesitantly, "Let's hold off until next semester. Stacy's vocal lessons are already costing us a lot." The disparity became even more pronounced when Stacy entered her senior year of high school. One evening when I was 15, during dinner, my parents revealed a big decision they had made. "We've been saving up carefully," they explained. Then my father added proudly, "We've decided to send Stacy to Preston College." It was one of the most prestigious schools in the state. Excitement was written all over Stacy's face. "That's absolutely wonderful," my mother added enthusiastically. "And that's not all. You can use our apartment near the campus. You won't have to worry about rent and can focus entirely on your studies." Upon hearing this, I silently pushed the peas around on my plate. There was no need to hide how I felt, because no one cared about me anyway. All the attention in our house was directed toward Stacy's bright and cheerful face. Her smile stood out, and it felt as though my existence was fading away. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear Stacy talking excitedly about her dreams. She spoke animatedly about her future plans and aspirations, while my mind began calculating. Having seen how much money my parents had spent on Stacy's tuition and living expenses, along with providing her a free apartment, I started to think calmly about how I could fund my own education. Gradually, I began to realize that in this situation, I couldn't expect the same kind of support. When I fully grasped that reality, it hit me hard. But instead of breaking down in tears, I started planning my next steps. The next day, I decided to visit my grandparents' antique shop. When I explained my situation to my grandfather, he listened intently. "Anne, if you're serious about this, I might be able to help a little with your college expenses," he said. He rested his hand on his chin thoughtfully, pausing for a moment. "But I think it would be good for you to gain some experience earning your own money. How about working here after school?" And so, everything began to move forward. While Stacy was busy packing for her prestigious university, I started working at the antique shop every afternoon after school. At the shop, I helped organize inventory, assisted with catalog creation, and even interacted with customers. Under my grandfather's guidance, I gradually learned the basics of running a business and developed new skills. Meanwhile, my grandmother warmly supported my busy days, often bringing me snacks and sharing stories about the history of the vintage items in the shop. Through those stories, I learned the importance of an item's value and history, and I slowly began to understand the significance of the work I was doing. When I told my parents about my decision to save up for college on my own, they didn't seem surprised. Instead, they looked relieved, as though they were reassured by my determination to find my own path. The 3 years I spent working at my grandparents' antique shop turned out to be incredibly valuable and meaningful to me. Every afternoon, I diligently dusted old furniture and meticulously sorted through vintage jewelry at the shop. Over time, without realizing it, I developed a keen sense of efficiency and an appreciation for aesthetics. By the time I graduated high school, I had managed to save enough money from my earnings to fund my college education. It was also thanks to my grandparents paying me a higher hourly wage than others. That seemed to be their way of showing kindness. My graduation celebration wasn't a flashy event, just a quiet dinner with my family, but it felt like enough. I took immense pride in having worked hard to get this far without relying on any special assistance. For college, I chose a local state university and opted for a practical business program that allowed me to make the most of my savings. Through this choice, I felt confident about taking the first solid step toward my future career. The tuition at the state university was affordable, and I was even able to save a little money. I continued living at home and took the bus to campus, a modest choice but a logical one to reduce financial strain. "Dad, Mom," I began one evening, summoning my courage. "I'm thinking of buying a used car. It would make getting to class a little easier." Without lifting his gaze much from his smartphone, my father replied flatly, "Sorry, Anne. We don't have the means right now." My mother quickly added, as if to smooth things over, "Isn't the bus enough? Plenty of students use it." Reflecting on all the support they had given me so far, I found myself unable to respond. Instead, I silently carried a deep sense of gratitude in my heart. There were countless moments when I felt how fortunate I was to have their support. Each time, an inexpressible sense of thankfulness would well up inside me. Stacy had gotten her driver's license a long time ago, and I still vividly remember the time she received her car. Back then, I had just finished my first year of college and was relieved to have made it through my spring finals. But at that time, our house was filled with a special excitement and energy. The reason was that Stacy had finally graduated from Preston College and was about to move on to the next stage of her life. To celebrate Stacy's graduation, my parents organized an elaborate party, inviting relatives, friends, and neighbors. The days leading up to the event were a flurry of preparations, with every detail carefully planned. On the big day, the house was alive with activity, buzzing with people who had come to honor Stacy's success. It was filled with cheerful smiles, lively conversations, and an atmosphere of pure celebration. I was in the kitchen, engrossed in arranging appetizers on plates, when Stacy suddenly walked into the room. Next to her was Joe, the boyfriend she had dated during her college years. The two of them entered the room, leaning into each other as if they didn't have a care in the world. The scene was like something straight out of a movie, with natural smiles spreading across both Stacy and Joe's faces. Everyone around was captivated by their glow, and in no time, their presence commanded the room's attention. As they entered, Stacy addressed everyone gathered with a cheerful expression. "I'm engaged to Joe." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations, suddenly filling with a warm and bright atmosphere. Mom, overwhelmed with emotion, had tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at Stacy. Dad, on the other hand, expressed his joy by giving Stacy a hearty pat on the shoulder. The pat was so forceful that for a moment I worried Stacy might lose her balance. Still, in that moment, family and friends celebrated together, and a warm sense of unity filled the air. However, even in this joyous moment, an unexpected event was still waiting to unfold. The surprising moment came when Joe began to speak. He started talking in a gentle, sweet voice, and his words surprised everyone and left a lasting impression. After the wedding, we're planning to move to Connecticut. My parents run a very successful business there, and they've invited us to join them. We're set to take it over. Hearing this, Mom's tears flowed even more freely, falling in large drops. "My daughter and her husband are embarking on such an amazing path," she murmured emotionally. Dad puffed out his chest and said in a proud, booming voice, "I always knew you'd achieve something great." I stood quietly in the corner of the room, watching the scene unfold. No one seemed to acknowledge that I had completed my first year with a perfect 4.0 GPA, all while juggling school and a part-time job at a local cafe. But I had grown accustomed to that. During my second year of college, much of my time was spent helping prepare for my sister's wedding. Even so, I diligently pursued my studies and progressed. My parents devoted themselves to planning a perfect wedding for their child. They took out substantial loans for the venue, catering, flowers, music, and more. No expense was spared for Stacy and Joe. The wedding itself was a grand and emotional affair, with Stacy shining as the star of the day. After paying for my bridesmaid dress myself, I wore it proudly and watched my parents dance happily, feeling proud of them. They had spared no expense in creating a wonderful wedding. After Stacy and Joe moved to Connecticut, I understood the reality that my parents would be repaying the loans for years. That evening, as I was watching TV, Mom came up to me and said, "I need you to start paying for living expenses." I was a little taken aback by the sudden request. What brought this on? I almost blurted out the thought in my head, "You gave Stacy a free apartment." Dad sat uneasily in the recliner he rarely used. The wedding loans were still outstanding. Even though they had a little breathing room now, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I spoke with a slight tremble in my voice. "I've never once asked you for anything. I've worked part-time to pay for my tuition and taken the bus everywhere." Mom raised her hand to stop me. Then she and Dad exchanged a silent look, the kind they often shared when deciding how much to spend on Stacy's other activities. After a while, I responded, "Fine." Mom said I would need to pay $1,300 a month. I wanted to argue further, but I knew it would be pointless. "All right, I'll pay $1,300 a month." From that month on, I began paying $1,300 in living expenses each month. To afford it, I picked up extra shifts at the cafe. I often worked between classes or stayed until closing. Balancing work and studies left me with almost no time to sleep. My final year of college passed in a blur, carrying textbooks and my cafe apron. Every night, I stayed up late studying. Before I knew it, graduation day arrived. While my classmates prepared for grand parties and celebrations, my parents decided on a quiet dinner at home, inviting only my grandparents. Unlike Stacy's lavish catering, we sat around the dining table eating homemade lasagna. Grandma reached across the table to gently take my hand. "Dearest Anne, I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "Graduating with top honors while working part-time is truly remarkable." Before I could respond, Mom's phone buzzed, and her face lit up as she read the message. "Speaking of success," Mom interjected. "Stacy just texted me. She said their business is doing great. They're planning to expand to 2 new locations." I watched as my graduation dinner transformed into a celebration of Stacy's success in Connecticut. Grandma and Grandpa exchanged glances as if they sensed something. Grandpa gently placed his hand on my shoulder. My hard work in college bore fruit sooner than expected. Less than 2 weeks after graduating, I was hired by Anderson Mitchell, one of the top firms in the city. The starting salary was higher than I'd imagined, and I felt excited about the career that lay ahead. Daily life soon settled into a routine, and I became deeply focused on proving my value at work. Still, every month, Mom reminded me about the living expenses. "Don't forget to pay on Friday. We're counting on that money." And just like that, 3 years went by. I received a major promotion and was assigned to work abroad for a year. For me, it was the perfect opportunity, not just professionally, but also to finally leave my parents' house. I could hardly contain my excitement. At last, I wouldn't have to stress about covering my living expenses anymore. Still, one lingering concern continued to weigh heavily on my mind. The matter centered around my dog, Max. Leaving Max behind was a bittersweet reality I had to face, but it was a necessary decision for the sake of my job. My biggest worry was finding the right person to take care of him in my absence. Max was an important part of my family, and I wanted to leave him with someone I trusted. After much deliberation, I decided to ask my parents to take care of him. I thought that would put my mind at ease, but another issue arose. My parents told me I'd need to pay $1,300 a month for Max's care. At first, I was shocked and wanted to push back. However, after hearing their reasoning, I began to understand their perspective. They explained that they had their own lives, and that taking in Max and caring for him long-term wouldn't be easy. They pointed out that caring for a dog required time and effort, including daily walks, meals and vet visits, which justified the cost. Although the expense felt burdensome, I realized that Max's health and happiness were my top priorities. I concluded that paying $1,300 a month was a necessary step to ensure Max was well cared for. Once the payments to my parents were settled, I began preparing for my new life overseas while keeping a watchful eye on Max's well-being from afar. During my assignment abroad, I heard the news that Stacy and Joe had welcomed a baby boy. I saw their photos shared on social media, but I never made the effort to visit them in person. By then, our interactions had dwindled to nothing more than the occasional birthday messages and Christmas greetings. That arrangement was working fine, but one phone call changed everything. Anne. My mother's voice was trembling. I need to talk to you about Stacy. There's been a problem, and it seems their business has collapsed. On top of that, Joe had a serious falling out with his parents. They're furious about how he managed things, and apparently they haven't spoken in days. I closed my eyes, sensing what was coming next. Stacy said she's coming back to live at home. She also mentioned something about Joe and the baby. I see, I answered quietly. Mom seemed to be thinking for a moment. Anne, is it okay if I clear out your room? It sounded as though the decision had already been made. Stacy and Joe need to set up a nursery for Daniel. And where am I supposed to sleep when I return? There's a perfect sofa in the living room, Mom replied. It seemed like the move was already finalized. You're joking, right? Why my room? Mom's tone turned sharp. Stop being so selfish, Anne. Stacy has a baby. That baby needs a proper room. With those words, I had no choice but to accept that my room would be overtaken by a crib and other baby items. My belongings were hastily piled into a corner of the living room. With my sister's family moving back into the house, space became cramped, and that's when my parents brought up another demand. They wanted me to double the payment for Max's care. They argued that having Stacy's family around increased their workload, and the cost of caring for the dog needed to match that. The proposal left me both shocked and slightly perplexed. While I thought I could manage $1,300 a month, doubling that amount was far too much for me to bear. Additionally, with my sister's family moving back, I started to worry if Max could stay comfortable in the changing household environment. I told them I needed time to consider it, and then ended the call. That night, I turned on my computer and began searching for apartments. I shortlisted a few promising places within walking distance of my workplace. I told myself I needed to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. After careful consideration, I made a calm decision to leave home and take Max with me. Since my overseas assignment was nearing its end, it felt like the perfect timing. I was certain that bringing Max back to live with me was the best decision for him. When I shared my choice with my parents, their reactions were a mix of surprise and concern, but I stood firm and didn't waver. I genuinely believed that staying with me was what would make Max happiest. Later, I picked him up and moved into my new apartment. I ordered takeout and sat on the bare living room floor. The day I picked Max up from my parents' house was the last time I saw my family. I simply said goodbye and left. I didn't experience any guilt. I simply felt a sense of peace. In the calm of my new apartment, I spent quiet days settling in and adjusting to my new life. I bought a comfortable bed, a soft couch not meant for sleeping, and my own kitchen tools. Although I wasn't entirely used to the new place, work was going well, and Max and I enjoyed fulfilling days together. About a month later, my mother called me. Without any preamble, she launched into an angry tirade. "Why haven't you sent the money? Don't you think you should honor your promises?" she demanded. I laughed and replied, "What Stacy needs right now is to take full responsibility for herself. I've taken Max, moved out, and am paying rent for my own apartment, so I no longer have an obligation to pay living expenses. Stacy should be the one handling that." "What did you just say?" "Do you have any idea what kind of situation Stacy is dealing with right now?" "It doesn't matter to me what kind of situation Stacy is in. It's time for her to step up, work, and take responsibility for her own living expenses. I'll be keeping an eye on how things unfold." After I spoke, there was silence on the other end of the phone. I could feel the reality sinking into her mind, as if I could hear her organizing her thoughts. Her once steady source of income was gone, leaving only an unemployed daughter who had never paid a single bill. Anne. Suddenly, Mom's voice softened, with a sweetness I recognized from when she used to ask for favors when I was a child. "Don't rush. Can't we figure this out together? Why not come back home and live with us? That would be the fairest arrangement, wouldn't it?" I leaned back into the new couch I had carefully chosen for myself. This was my apartment, and no one could complain about anything here. "Sorry, but that's not happening." "But Anne, we're family, aren't we?" "Family?" I could hardly believe she had the audacity to say that. Without thinking, I cut her off mid-sentence. "Family? You tried to give my money to Stacy without telling me. You turned my room into a nursery and left me to cover all the bills by myself. You treated my life like an ATM and Stacy like royalty. How is that a family? Goodbye." I hung up and immediately blocked their number. That was 6 months ago. Grandma and Grandpa have kept me updated on their situation, but I never ask for details. They understand what I need and know that I made the right decision. Stacy, Joe, and Daniel still live at the house, contributing nothing to the household expenses. I've heard that my parents are struggling to get by with the loan still unpaid. They've even gone around asking relatives for money, but the truth about how they favored Stacy over me has spread. No one is willing to lend them anything. Of course, my grandparents haven't offered any support either. In fact, I've heard they've taken steps to ensure their inheritance doesn't go to my parents. Stacy, with a small child, still hasn't found a job, and Joe reportedly has no motivation to work. As for me, my new life is peaceful. I recently got another promotion at work, bought a new car, and started attending evening MBA classes. My apartment is always neat, with the fridge stocked full of fresh ingredients, ready for whenever I feel like cooking. Each night, I now drift off to sleep peacefully in my own bed. Just the other day, I bumped into one of Joe's relatives at the grocery store. She mentioned casually that they were expecting another baby. I responded with a simple smile and wished them all the happiness in the world. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought about how my parents might be figuring out how to cover daycare costs for the new baby. However, that's no longer something I need to worry about. For the first time, I'm putting myself first, and it feels undeniably like the right choice. Emotionally, it was a complex journey, but I stand firm in the path I chose and have no regrets about my decision. With Max by my side, I am genuinely content and excited about the new life that lies ahead.